It is the beginning of a great fulfillment of a prophecy that a prophet by the name of Ezekiel saw many, many years ago. I'm going to show you a prophecy from the prophet Ezekiel, and we're going to show you a dual application to it, but we're going to end up showing you how what's under here fits in with what you see over there and how it all connects together.
I'm going to turn to the book of Ezekiel here, and you're going to turn with me if you'd like to see what it has to say. I'm in Ezekiel chapter 47, beginning in verse 1. It's a prophecy of a river flowing out from under a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem and flowing down and healing the Dead Sea.
Attention world! The latest news from Israel, 3 spine-chilling prophetic events have just taken place, and the world is left in shock. These terrifying incidents have shocked the nation to its core, and are sending shivers down the spines of those who have witnessed them.
This is pretty cool, and we're probably seeing prophecy fulfilled right now. And it has to do, now stay with me here, because I want you to grasp this. It has to do with the atmosphere of Israel, Jordan, the whole Middle East, because when I talk about the atmosphere, now we're not talking about the spiritual atmosphere, we're talking about in the fact that a lot of Israel, when you get out of the Jezreel Valley and you go into what's called the Judean wilderness, it's red rose rock, it's very rocky, it's very desolate, it's very dry. And basically what happens is it rains in Jerusalem, it rains in the higher mountains, and that water pours down the mountains into what's called wadis, which are, we call them little canyons. And because the Dead Sea is below sea level, like 1,300 feet, Jerusalem is high, the water goes down into the Dead Sea.
Coming up in our next news episode, we will bring to you news on Death Sea and does it have any prophetic significance in these times.
Eagle 7 Sunrise TV is Messianic TV network. Run by Bethlehem Missions Foundation in managing events of live broadcast or published reported news, messianic information about current events. This may be provided through many different media. Word of mouth, printing, postal systems, broadcasting, electronic communication, or through the testimony of observers and witnesses to events. Eagle 7 Sunrise TV brings to you world news events surrounding modern-day Israel and the Jewish people. God's plan for the entire planet revolves around the physical and spiritual restoration of Israel and the consequent return of the Messiah Yeshua Jesus. Whether or not the nations realize it, world events are swirling around Israel and God's agenda, not the other way around. Eagle 7 Sunrise TV hope to get connected with you in the prophetic dots between God's plan for mankind, Israel, and today's news from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, and Messianic believers in Yeshua around the world. We has no partisan political affiliation. It seeks to present the news fair-mindedly and offers a wide range of analysis based on Messianic opinion pieces. We also highlight developments from Messianic perspective throughout the diaspora, and thus serve as a global focal point for the Messianic.
Nestled between the borders of Jordan and Palestine, the Dead Sea is a large salt lake measuring 429 meters below sea level, a fact which establishes it as the lowest point on Earth. What makes the Dead Sea so unique, however, is the hypersalinity of the water, approximately 8.6 times saltier than an ocean. These conditions make it impossible for any living creature to inhabit its waters. Hence the name Dead Sea. The land on either side is Holy Land, extremely rich in religious history and central to all 3 Abrahamic religions. Many prophets have walked along the shores of the Dead Sea, and from the prophecies of the prophet Ezekiel to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Dead Sea may hold the key to some of human civilization's biggest questions about religion and life. Ezekiel 47, 1-2. One afterward he brought me again unto the door of the house, and, behold, Waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house, stood toward the east, and the waters came down from under from the right side of the house, at the south side. To then brought he me out of the way of the gate northward, and led me about the way without unto that a gate by the way that looketh eastward, and, behold, there ran out waters on the right side. 6 And he said unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen this? Then he brought me, and caused me to return to the brink of the river. 7 Now when I had returned, behold, at the bank of the river were very many trees on the one side and on the other. 8 Then said he unto me, These waters issue out toward the east country, and go down into the desert, and go into the sea, which being brought forth into the sea, the waters shall be healed. 9 And it shall come to pass, that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the rivers shall come, shall live, and there shall be a very great multitude of fish, because these waters shall come thither, for they shall be healed. And everything shall live whither the river cometh. 10 And it shall come to pass, that the fishes shall stand upon it from Engedi even unto Eneglaim. They shall be a place to spread forth nets, their fish shall be according to their kinds, as the fish of the great sea, exceeding many. 11 But the mirry places thereof, and the marishes thereof shall not be healed, they shall be given to salt. Let us go back to the year 2001, and join evangelist, author and teacher Perry Stone.
So get ready to be blessed and encouraged. And now, here is your host and teacher, Perry Stone.
There are times that some of the greatest prophetic things happening are not visible to the natural eye, and I happen to be standing right now on dirt at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found by a little shepherd boy in a cave not far from here. But directly under my feet is something that you can't see that I know is here because it was discovered, and I'm going to be telling you about it because it is the beginning of a great fulfillment of a prophecy that a prophet by the name of Ezekiel saw many, many years ago, about 2,600 years ago or so. We want to welcome you to the Manifest program today, and we're going to show you a prophecy from the prophet Ezekiel, and we're going to show you a dual application to it, but we're going to end up showing you how what's under here fits in with what you see over there and how it all connects together. It's good to have a couple of our buses. I got the red bus and the yellow bus and the blue bus, and yes, I tell you what, we're just having too much fun. This is crazy, isn't it? We're just having too much fun. All right, let me read to you a prediction that the prophet Ezekiel saw. The prophet Ezekiel is one of the prophets of the exile, they call him, and he has visions of what Jerusalem is going to be like in the future. As a matter of fact, when you go to the book of Ezekiel, and you can do that if you have a Bible right now at home, you'll discover that when you get to the book of Ezekiel, right around chapter 38 and 39 is the war of Gog and Magog, and then in chapter 40 it says, In the visions of God he brought me into the land of Israel and set me upon a very high mountain which was by the frame of the city on the south. So he begins to then describe what appears to be, and is, a temple that will one day be built in the city of Jerusalem that is absolutely massive. As a matter of fact, the Holy of Holies in the time of Jesus that was on the temple that was called Herod's temple, it wasn't really Herod's temple, it was God's temple, but it was known as the second temple by the Jewish people. If you take the Holy of Holies, which was the front of the building where the gold crown sat on top, the temple in Jerusalem that will be built during the millennial reign of Jesus, the Holy of Holies is 3 times higher. Many years ago, we came to Jerusalem and met a woman from the priestly family, a Kohanim, and she showed us an actual model of what the temple would be like. It is going to be fabulous. Now, and when you read the prophecy of Ezekiel, chapter 40, 41, 42, 44, 46, all the way to the end, he comes to chapter 47 and he says something very unusual. And I want to explain it to you this way. He describes that in that temple, which is going to exist one day in the city of Jerusalem, a water source that is going to come out from underneath the Temple Mount area, and that water is going to end up making its way all the way into the Dead Sea. In fact, according to the prophecy, half of the water will go to the Mediterranean, and half of it will come to the Dead Sea. Now, your Bible talks about the former sea and the latter sea, and it uses different words to describe it. But Jerusalem is 2,500 feet in elevation, and there's only two seas between it, the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. That's it. So part of this water under Jerusalem will go one way and part will go another way. Now let me talk about the water for a moment. Is there any evidence there in Jerusalem right now about a water source? And the answer is yes. I will never forget in the 1990s, Robert Vandermott and myself, and there was a gentleman named Professor Peter Mikas. We were all doing studies on the Garden of Eden being in the area of Israel and the center of it being Jerusalem. And I know that sounds strange, and we've written a book on that already. We don't have time to go into detail, but we found out from a man that was an Arab that there was a water source underneath the city of Jerusalem. So I went to Rabbi Getz, who was living at the time, and I said, Rabbi Getz, is it true that there was a massive water source under Jerusalem? He said yes. He said, we don't know if it's an artesian well that's coming from Bethel or coming from the mountains here that goes underground, but there is. In the 1940s, we interviewed let me say that differently. We interviewed a man whose father in the 1940s was working at the Rockefeller Museum, and they broke through a pipe. They were actually laying pipe for the British, and they were digging underground, and they broke through an opening where there was so much water flowing, it sounded like the jet propeller on a plane. That was before jet engines, and he described that to us. And so we then went to a place called the Twin Pools. This was the same evening in the early 1990s. And in the Twin Pools, they shared with us there, the Arab man who watches this wonderful old church took us under the basement. He said, now, here's the water, and it's coming in. I said, where is it coming from? I said, is it rainwater? He said, not this. He said, we have actually drained this water, and in just a few days, it would fill back up. I said, so you're saying what? He said, well, there is water somewhere deep under Jerusalem. Why am I telling you that? Because when the Lord returns in Zechariah chapter 14, and his feet steps foot upon the Mount of Olives, the mountain shall cleave in two parts, one part to the east and one part to the west, and there will be a great valley running north and south, and there will be water coming from Jerusalem toward the Dead Sea. Now, the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea for a reason, and the reason it's called the Dead Sea is there's nothing, ladies and gentlemen, that can live there. There's over 22 chemicals and minerals in the Dead Sea. There are no fish there, but the prophet Ezekiel said there would one day be fish in the Dead Sea. He said there would be fishermen from En-Eglaim. Now, En-Eglaim, many believe, is in this area here, all the way to En-Gedi, which is in that direction there, and they would spread their nets and catch fish here. Well, let me stop right there and drive that point up that the prophet said that was going to happen here, but let's go a step further. How in the world can the Dead Sea be healed? The answer is there will be, according to the prophet, a temple in Jerusalem. When Jesus splits the Mount of Olives in Zechariah 14, there is water that comes from Jerusalem and starts pouring out into the sea. And this is the northern part of the Dead Sea. Now, you can tell just by looking. Everybody turn around there and look at that. I know this is going to sound strange. Can you see everything that's desolate and dry? The sea used to come all the way up to right here. Used to come all the way up. Look how much it's dried up. I'm telling you that when we came here in '85, it was nothing like this. It was all the way down there where those trees are growing, where that building is. Now look how it's drying up. Now the interesting thing is, when Jesus steps on the Mount of Olives and the water from Jerusalem comes here, this is what I want you to understand. Jerusalem is in this direction, and it's 2,500 feet in elevation. The Dead Sea is 1,300 feet below sea level. So here's what you've got. So when Jerusalem is shaken, that supernatural artesian well, water source, whatever it is, that water will pour in to these ravines. Now, one of the ravines, oh, I love telling you this, one of the ravines happens to be here in the Qumran area. As a matter of fact, right over down the road here, just between those two mountains, is a small stream that is part of what's called the Kidron Brook. Now, the Kidron Valley sits in front of the Eastern Gate, between the Eastern Gate and the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives. And there is, of course, there's a lot of sewage in that area as well, to be quite honest with you, but there's water that comes into that little Kidron Valley called the Kidron Brook. It's mentioned in the New Testament, and it goes all the way into the desert, all the way into the desert, all the way, and it comes out right down here in Qumran into, you guessed guessed it, the Dead Sea. So in other words, there is a water source in Jerusalem. The second thing you need to know is the earthquake fault line. Now, my guy, Gideon Shore, has a brother-in-law here in Israel, and I won't name him because this program goes into Israel, and he's a geologist. He has a PhD from Berkeley. He and his department in Tel Aviv helped discover the earthquake fault lines in Israel. I actually have a map somewhere in my office that has all the major earthquake fault lines in Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, there is right now a major fault line that runs across the Mount of Olives, and when Jesus steps foot on it and it splits, literally that fault line is going to give way. That fault line was discovered many years ago. So if we start putting the picture together, it gets very interesting because their water source is already in Jerusalem, the earthquake fault line is already on the Mount of Olives, and that water comes now in the Kidron, and when it rains, it washes down into the Dead Sea. Those are three important points. Now, in the book of Ezekiel, here's what it says. Afterwards he brought me again to the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house stood toward the east. Now that's like Solomon's temple and Herod's temple. The main door faced the east toward the Mount of Olives. That's what he's saying here. The waters came down from under the right side of the house at the south side of the altar. He then brought me out of the way of the gate northward and led me about the way without unto the other gate, and so forth. Now let me get down to this part. He started measuring the waters in verse 3, and they come to the ankles. He then measures the water in verse 4, and it says they're to the waist or to the loins. He measures the water, and all of a sudden they move from ankle deep, they go to the knees, and they go to the waist, and then it becomes over here in verse 5. He measured 1,000, and actually it's 1,000 cubits, as it says. He measured 1,000, and there was a river that I could not pass over, for the waters were risen waters to swim in, a river that could not be passed over. Now when you read it, and to save time, I didn't read all of it. You can do this later. Here's what happens. I told you earlier about this area. Now, let's go into the prophetic future. Oh, I'm ready for that. I'm ready to tell you this now. Several years ago, Globes magazine reported on this. There was a major discovery made underneath our feet. You ready? They found a huge, massive supply of water. 3 miles in circumference. Oh, you're not hearing me. Now, why is it important to understand that? Because you already have water in Jerusalem. You already have the Mount of Olives with the earthquake fault line. You already have the mountains that connect to that area where water can come into the sea, right? But now you have a huge water source underneath our feet. Now, why is that significant prophetically? Because they can all verify this, and I'll have them verify this, and we'll show you some clips, but so you'll know. Now, you look now, and all you see is the mountains of Jordan, the Dead Sea, and you see where the Dead Sea is dried up, and you see the desert. We're in the Judean wilderness, by the way, but you don't see a lot of trees. But I'm telling you, when you come in this direction and go that way, you see date trees, you see palm trees, you see fruit trees. Am I telling the truth? And there's farms. Now, when I came here in 1988, you listen to me, there was nothing here. I stood over there on top of Mount Nebo where Moses saw the promised land, looked over here, and all I saw was one little green patch called Jericho. And boy, I'm telling you, you go over there now and look, and all you see is green, 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 green. You know where? You know what they're doing? They're getting the water. And there's... See, you came by here, but you didn't know it. The Valley of Achor is right up here. You know what the Valley of Achor is now? Look at it. You passed it. Vineyards, vineyards, vineyards. You know what the Bible said in the Old Testament? The Valley of Achor shall become a place of vineyards and for herds to lie down. Come on, talk to me now. How can you do that without water? Now, the exciting thing about me standing here is to tell you that Ezekiel goes on to say in Ezekiel chapter 47 that there'll be trees on either side of the river, verse 7. He says the water goes into the desert being brought forth to the sea will be healed, that everything the waters touch will be healed. Fishermen will come, verse 10, from En-Gedi to En-Eglaim and spread their nets. But here's verse 11, the miry places and the marshes thereof shall not be healed, and they shall be given to salt. For this prophecy, now I'm going to say this to you, let me backtrack. When I came to Israel several years ago, and this has been probably, I'm going to estimate 15 to 16 years ago, I read this prophecy with my guide Gideon on the bus, and we realized something, that this prophecy indicates that part of the sea here will never be healed. It'll be miry, it'll be given totally to salt, and part of the sea would be healed. Now, you and I know that you cannot take one body of water and make part of it one way and part of it another way. It's impossible in the natural. The only way it could happen is if you have two seas forming. Guess what took place? Right across from Masada, and you can see this on the modern satellite maps, there is now a peninsula that has formed on the Israeli side all the way over to the side of the country of Jordan. Now that peninsula there, the only way they connect water from the northern part of the sea here to the southern part of the sea is a canal that they have dug to bring this water into that southern part. That southern part, ladies and gentlemen, how many of you partners were with me on the pre-trip? Did you all see the southern part of the sea? Am I telling the truth? It is not like this. This looks like good clear water. You can swim in this. You can't swim in the south. It is totally salty. I mean, there's cakes and layers of salt. Why? Because the Dead Sea has the Jordan River coming in it, but it has no outlet. You know what? If you don't learn to put out, you're going to die, just like the Dead Sea. God didn't create you just to receive, receive, receive. God created you to be a receiver and a giver. Oh, that'll preach right there now. Come on, talk to me, somebody. So here's the part that I've got to get you to see, and I want you to understand. And that is that the Dead Sea has now formed two seas. This water is in the northern part. They are also talking about digging a channel from the Mediterranean and bringing water from the Mediterranean into the Dead Sea area. Now that's in the works. That's being talked about. That's in the process now. And so in other words, one day there'll be fish in the Dead Sea. Well, here's the thing that is really fabulous. Charlie Ellis, who's behind the camera, was with us several years ago when we went from here all the way to the southern part of the Dead Sea, down to the area where Sodom and Gomorrah one time existed. At the bottom part of the Dead Sea, there are fish farms. They have found this water underground. They've made ponds. They've made holes in ponds. They've got these ponds, and they're raising three kinds of fish, all edible, all available in restaurants and hotels in that area. Folks, the Bible said 2,600 years ago or so, the Dead Sea would be healed, fish would be in the Dead Sea, there would be fresh water that would be there, and when the Lord returns back, when He comes back and returns, that all of this would be a part of prophecy. Now let me give you one more nugget. I don't have time to develop this and probably shouldn't even talk about it at this point because it sidetracks from what we've been sharing with you prophetically.
I'm going to turn to the book of Ezekiel here, and you're going to turn with me if you'd like to see what it has to say. I'm in Ezekiel chapter 47, beginning in verse 1. It's a prophecy of a river flowing out from under a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem and flowing down and healing the Dead Sea to the point that the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point on earth, totally salty, is going to rise and be full of fresh water, and there's going to be a fishing industry on it, and some of the finest vegetables and fruit grown on the banks that you've ever tasted. It's coming. Ezekiel 47:1. After he brought me again to the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward. Now that's interesting. Waters coming out from under the temple, right on the Temple Mount. And when the man had the line in his hand, he went forth eastward and measured 1,000 cubits, in verse 3. That's about 1,500 feet. It'd be a little longer. My cubit's 21 inches, but they range from anywhere from 16 to 21 inches or so. And so 1,500 feet from the temple, the water was up to his ankles. He went another 1,500 feet, and the water was up to his knees. Went another 1,500 feet, and it was up even to his chest. And then when he went another 15, which was about 6,000 feet, or a little over a mile, the water was so deep he was swimming in it. And it ran downhill for about 19 miles till it hit the Jordan River in the north end of the Dead Sea, healed all that desert he talks about, all the way out, and the sea rises. And then he says, the east country, go down to the desert, go down to the sea, being brought forth to the sea, the waters shall be healed. Verse 8. And it came to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the rivers shall come thither, for they shall be healed, and everything shall live whether the river cometh, these shall come to pass, and the fishers shall stand upon it from En Gedi Now, I have been to En-Gedi. En-Gedi is a spring with water flowing 6 inches deep, couple feet wide maybe. Beautiful place in the desert. Everything's dead around it, except they've used the water to irrigate a few little crops over about 5 or 10 acres there. And everything else is just rock and sand, and you walk just a short distance down to the sea, and you walk into the Dead Sea right now, and when you get in about chest deep, your feet come off the bottom and you start floating. You cannot go underwater in the Dead Sea. All of that's going to rise up many, many feet and flow back into the surrounding area. And then it's interesting how specific he says. He says, the miry places thereof and the marshes thereof shall not be healed. They shall be given to salt. Now, right now, it's just giant salt deposits, like salt figures, like standing around everywhere. And by the river upon the bank thereof, on the side of that side, shall grow all trees for meat, whose leaf shall not fade, neither shall the fruit thereof be consumed. It shall bring forth new fruit according to his month, because their waters that issued out of the sanctuary, right under the temple, and the fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof for medicine. So, get ready. A lot of people go to the Dead Sea now for the therapy of salt and mud and being able to float and read a book. But there will come a time when you won't be able to do that. You'll go take your rod and catch yourself a fish and go over and pick fruit off of a tree and eat it. Bible prophecy, it will come to pass, because all Bible prophecies come to pass in time. All right, I got to get back. I got more work to do.
Now,
This is pretty cool, and we're probably seeing prophecy fulfilled right now. And it has to do, now stay with me here, because I want you to grasp this. It has to do with the atmosphere of Israel, Jordan, the whole Middle East, because when I talk about the atmosphere, now we're not talking about the spiritual atmosphere, we're talking about in the fact that a lot of Israel, when you get out of the Jezreel Valley and you go into what's called the Judean wilderness, it's red rose rock, it's very rocky, it's very desolate, it's very dry. And basically what happens is it rains in Jerusalem, it rains in the higher mountains, and that water pours down the mountains into what's called wadis, which are, we call them little canyons. And because the Dead Sea is below sea level, like 1,300 feet, Jerusalem is high, the water goes down into the Dead Sea. So this is how they water the desert. This is how the desert gets watered, is because of those rains that come. Now, there are other parts of the world, and Jordan is one of those that don't necessarily get a lot of rain. They'll have I asked the guys, I said, at Petra, do you have rain? He said, you might have one storm in the winter. We have had a few flash floods in our history. That's a whole nother prophetic teaching there. But we went to the Dead Sea. Now, we were all excited about the Dead Sea because you get to go past Jericho, Qumran, the people ready to some of them were going to swim in the Dead Sea, and the weather flipped like I had never seen in 40 Holy Land trips. Now, normally at the Dead Sea, you can get some light rain, but it rained a torrent there. And now the Dead Sea has an inlet, but no outlet. It's actually a lake, and the waves were violent. I mean, the waves were tossing. I have never seen anything like it before.
The Dead Sea figures in biblical accounts, dating to the time of Abraham, first of the Hebrew patriarchs, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the two cities along the lake, according to the Hebrew Bible, that were destroyed by fire from heaven because of their wickedness. When rained down fire on Sodom and Gomorrah, it turns the city upside down. Jasher 19, 51-52. 51 Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah and upon all these cities brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. 52 And he overthrew these cities, all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. And Adu the wife of Lot looked back to see the destruction of the cities, for her compassion was moved on account of her daughters who remained in Sodom, for they did not go with her. According to archaeologists in 1980 discovered that the remainings of Sodom and Gomorrah is found in the southern end of the Dead Sea. The Gihon spring was the main source of water for for the city of Jerusalem from its founding more than 5,000 years ago until the 20th century. In Hebrew, Gihon is a derivative of gushing, which the spring continues to do for tourists today is the spring prophesied by Ezekiel that it will flows from the temple to give life in the Dead Sea. The Jordan River is the only major water source flowing into the Dead Sea. Although there are small perennial springs under and around the Dead Sea, forming pools and quicksand pits along the edges, there are no outlet streams. The rapid fall of the water level, 1 to 1.5 meters per year, is supposed to explain this process. Left is a vast area of salt-rich ground of the fallen dry Dead Sea. Sinkholes are caused by the dissolution of soluble minerals like gypsum, calcite, salt. The Dead Sea is shrinking, and as it recedes, the freshwater aquifers along the perimeter of the lake are receding along with it. As this fresh water diffuses into salt deposits beneath the surface of the shoreline, the water slowly dissolves the deposits until the earth above collapses. Ezekiel 47 verse 8 Then said he unto me, These waters issue out toward the east country, and go down into the desert, and go into the sea, which being brought forth into the sea, the waters shall be healed. 9 And it shall come to pass, that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the rivers shall come, shall live, and there shall be a very great multitude of fish, because these waters shall come thither, for they shall be healed. And everything shall live whither the river cometh. 10 And it shall come to pass, that the fishes shall stand upon it from Engedi even unto Eneglaim. They shall be a place to spread forth nets, their fish shall be according to their kinds, as the fish of the great sea, exceeding many. 11 But the mirry places thereof, and the marishes thereof shall not be healed, they shall be given to salt. 12 And by the river upon the bank thereof, on this side and on that side, shall grow all trees for meat, whose leaf shall not fade, neither shall the fruit thereof be consumed, it shall bring forth new fruit according to his months. Because their waters they issued out of the sanctuary, and the fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof for medicine. Zechariah 14 to 7 to 11 It will be a unique day, without daytime or nighttime, a day known to the Lord. When evening comes, there will be light. On that day living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half to the eastern sea and half to the western sea. In summer and in winter, the Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day there will be one Lord, and his name, if only named, the whole land, from Jaber to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, will become like the Rabbah, but Jerusalem will be raised up and remain in its place. From the Benjamin gate to the site of the first gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the royal wine presses. It will be inhabited, never again will it be destroyed. Jerusalem will be secure.